Is it possible that herd immunity is developing a lot more rapidly than we thought was going to happen early on in the course of SARS-CoV-2? Yes, absolutely, that seems to be the case. We're going to present more evidence for the XYZ hypothesis as well. Got to look at the fact that we have Ivermectin is really coming to the fore now and is really jumping in there as a frontline treatment for early stage COVID-19, and I'll show you some data around that. Doing a little head-to-head comparison with hydroxychloroquine. We'll see how that all comes out, and as well, rapid tests. Rapid saliva tests could be a real game changer here. So let's talk about all these things because we got a lot of progress to talk about right now, and we're going to get into that all today. Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Chris Martinson here with your August 20th, 2020 update on SARS-CoV-2. Briefly, the XYZ hypothesis for those who maybe were not here for the earlier versions of this, it just simply asks this question, which is, how do we account for charts that look like this, right? So we have all these different charts. Let me get my drawing tool out here, which look like have this same basic shape. So these are cases and case counts, and we didn't know how to account for the fact that places as disparate as Pakistan and Germany were showing very, very similar profiles. And as well, when we look at deaths and we line them up, we see here for Belgium compared to Sweden, compared to Italy, Spain, France, UK, Netherlands, they all look roughly the same when you line up where their deaths started to spike. And the question is, well, why? Why would all these different countries have very similar looking case count charts and death charts, even though very different approaches to the so-called non-pharmaceutical interventions, the NPIs, things like social distancing and masks? Countries started late, some started earlier, very different treatment protocols. Some countries are outlawing hydroxychloroquine, other ones are using it. So we have to begin to account for how we get places like Pakistan showing up as being very similar to, say, Italy. And what are we seeing there? Let me come down to, I have to jump a bit because I think I put this, yeah, check it out. I put a few slides lower than I thought. So here we saw just in today, in August 20th edition here, we see at the Telegraph UK, scientists mull mystery of Pakistan's falling COVID-19 death rates. Hypothesizing here a young population. Is it because they're young? Is it robust immune systems and smart lockdowns? It may explain the fall, but health officials, they remain cautious and uncertain. That's because I don't think they're really accounting for the T-cell immunity theory here yet, hypothesis. All right. The article reads, 2 months after Pakistan appeared headed for a skyrocketing COVID-19 outbreak, case numbers and death tolls have fallen in what doctors say is a welcome but puzzling drop in the disease. Well, not that puzzling if you've been following this channel, because we see this happening all over the place after place. While neighboring India has raced up the world ranking for countries badly hit by the new coronavirus, Pakistan is heading in the other direction. A young population, robust immune systems, a system of localized smart lockdowns have all been touted as the reasons for the fall. But health officials admit the reasons remain unclear. In mid-June, the daily death toll was pushing 150. The outbreak was predicted to continue rising until at least August, as lax social distancing during May's Eid holidays fed into a boom in cases. Sounds like spring break here in the U.S. Senior officials were privately predicting the start of August was not looking good as oxygen supplies ran low and hospital wards filled. Instead, recorded deaths fell sharply and now hover around 20 per day. The daily tally of cases has fallen from more than 6,000 each day to well below 1,000, and restaurants have reopened as remaining lockdown precautions have been lifted. All right. Now, how do we begin to account for that? It's with this XYZ hypothesis, which is asking, hey, can we get to herd immunity before we see some significant proportion of the population having antibodies to the coronavirus? That would be 70, 80%, some numbers like that. And the hypothesis very quickly, for those who haven't seen it yet, goes like this. Well, we know that some percent, X% of the population here, they have pre-existing immunity, probably, possibly cellular immunity, T cells in particular. So either full or partial immunity right out of the get-go, right? Some people completely asymptomatic, so we'd call them as having what we would call full immunity, and people with mild symptoms, so partial immunity. At any rate, that's probably due to prior exposure to other common cold coronaviruses. So some percent of the population pre-immune. I just wrote 30% here. I don't know. Is it 20%? Is it 50, 40, 22? We don't know. Just this is a hypothesis. We're just throwing some stuff out to get the conversation started. Okay, Y percent of the people, they do get exposed, but then they don't develop antibodies. They have T cell immunity or possibly other cellular immunity, maybe T helper cells or killer T cells, something, right? And these are probably the mild cases. Maybe 40% of people are very mild. Maybe it's 50, something like that. Z percent of the people go down the traditional B cell antibody route. They get sick, and in truth, we know that the sicker you get, the more antibodies you tend to produce. So far, when they go around to places that got really hard hit, like Madrid, New York City, London, Lombardy, Italy, they find that the seroprevalence, the number of people for whom they can find antibodies against SARS-CoV-2 in their blood, hangs between 10 and 20%. So typically around 15%, but we see once you get to that 15% level, we see that the cases really start to fall off like that. So the hypothesis is that X plus Y plus Z plus this other thing, social behavior changes. Hey, that counts too. Once the super spreaders are taken out of the situation because they've gotten sick and already immune, once all the people who are worried about this because they got comorbidities, they're elderly, they take themselves out to the sidelines in this story. Those things also help to have the case counts and the death counts fall. So X plus Y plus Z plus social behavior changes, or SBC, that gives you your herd immunity at some level. That will, together, those will combine at some level, and I'm suggesting to you that the shape of these charts say it's already happened. All right, a little bit more on the XYZ hypothesis. Joe M here, at Joe MANC31 here, just today, earlier on Twitter, said, Chris Martenson, good data point for your next video. Cases flat in hard-hit Lombardy, but rising elsewhere where they got locked down and didn't get some immunity in their population like Lombardy did. X plus Y plus Z still looking good. Some data here from Nate Silver at Nate Silver 538, noting here that in Italy, for example, Lombardy, which was devastated February, March, has had 72 cases a day so far in August, about the same as 74 cases in July. So no difference from July to August. But the rest of Italy had cases increase from 161 a day to 342 a day in August. All right, so Nate wrote here, when people talk about second waves of COVID within a country or state, they need to look carefully at where within the country or state the cases are increasing. Often, it's not the same places that were hard hit during the first wave. So very important point. I've responded to it over and over again. People have sent me lots and lots of things saying, hey, Chris, look, Spain has rising cases. XYZ is invalid. And then I have to point out that where those cases are actually rising in Spain were places and provinces in Spain where they didn't have a significant first wave, where their seroprevalence is like between 0 and 5% or 6%, not 15, right? I had somebody recently say, hey, here's your first wave in Louisiana. Look at this. Louisiana's second wave, XYZ, is invalid, to which I had to go to the base data. And here we can see, for example, and here, slightly different. This is total cases, right? So here we're looking at total new corona cases. This is looking at the percentage of 7-day estimated case totals compared to the parish's peak. So we're comparing a percentage. So this right here was the max 100%. That was their peak caseload for Orleans and Jefferson counties down here. And here you can see that for both the blue and the green lines, they had their big first waves, and they got a little going on down here. But those are just a shadow of what they were before. And as well, for Calcasieu, here we see no first wave whatsoever, having a pretty strong first wave here. And the one that stands out is maybe not really confirming XYZ is this one, where they had a pretty significant first wave here in East Baton Rouge, but this is actually a more significant wave right here. So this is 100% of their peak totals here, but we don't know how this is going to play out yet. But at any rate, this is data I see over and over again, that where you are seeing the case counts now are very often in places that hadn't had their waves in the first place, like East Baton Rouge. And that places where you do see a little bit coming back, it's pretty subdued. And this can be explained a lot of different ways, the subdued sort of response. By the way, when I show those charts spiking and then falling, they don't go to zero. New York City, very badly hit. Lombardy, very badly hit. They are not at zero. 10, 20, 30, 100 cases a day, but not the thousands and thousands of cases per day that they had before. Okay, so at any rate, that does seem to support the XYZ theory so far, and so we're going to keep seeking answers for this, and we'll keep looking deeper to see if we can understand anything. In particular, I want to understand what's happening in East Baton Rouge now, to see if we can understand why they had a first wave that went away and then a second piece that's coming in like this now. All right. We also talked on Tuesday of this week about a rapid home test, things coming in, saliva test at any rate. It would be great if it could be at home. Right now, I don't see anything that says these are going to be home-based tests yet, but there are a couple on the way. First, the FDA provided emergency use authorization for a quick and affordable saliva-based COVID-19 test developed by Yale scientists. And it's a method called Saliva Direct. And it's still being further validated as a test for asymptomatic individuals, and that would include pre-symptomatic individuals, through a program that tests players and staff from the NBA. Saliva Direct is simpler, it's less expensive, less invasive than the traditional testing method, which is the nasopharyngeal swab. I haven't had one. I heard they're not that fun. They go all the way to the back of your cavity there, pretty deep in. Results so far have found that Saliva Direct is highly sensitive and yields similar outcomes as the NP or nasopharyngeal swabbing, so that's good news. You've got to know, though, that the NP swabbing is maybe this isn't totally positive, because they had a bunch of false negatives and false positives and things like that as a part of the NP program. So I was kind of hoping this would be maybe even more sensitive, but we'll see. So at any rate, this one is just going, it's making it immediately available to diagnostic laboratories. That's where this is going. And it also of note here is the method has been validated with reagents and instruments from multiple vendors. So that's a good sign. It doesn't take super specialized stuff that only comes from China, for instance. And by the way, we have more rapid tests on the way. Illinois has a rapid saliva test for COVID-19 that has now also been given the EUA by the FDA. So this is a good thing right here. And what I like about this, too, is it can address bottlenecks of time, cost, supplies, and enables fast and frequent testing on a large scale. And they're working with as many partners, make the testing method broadly available as possible. So one of the things that's kind of interesting about this is that because they're testing the saliva and finding the coronavirus, when you see those videos of people spitting on other people in protest, that's actually a pretty invasive, if not assaultive sort of a thing to do. So we just got to be very clear that body fluids obviously are going to be, including saliva, are going to carry large viral loads if somebody is in the viral replication stage of having SARS-CoV-2 invade their body, whether they're symptomatic or not. All right. So that's good news, and I'm hoping this results in home tests that come along soon enough, because we just had I wouldn't call it an incident, but somebody here in our personal circle here in Western Massachusetts started to feel bad, worried that it might have been COVID, had to struggle to find a place that would accept him, went there, and then had to wait a number of days, even I think it was 2.5 days in order to get results back. That's pretty typical and par for the course here in the United States. We're not anywhere near the first world status that you would have in, say, South Korea, where you can just drive up in your car, get a test really quick, or other places where you can get results in just a matter of hours or a half hour even. That's not how it is here where I live yet. So this would be great news if we could get these saliva tests. All right. Again, one of the things I do like to keep reminding people, this is not a disease I want to get at all. The Danish expert here is now warning younger part of the Danes that you risk serious late consequences from coronavirus. This came out on August 19th, and it says that, let's just check in here. Quote, since the outbreak of the coronavirus epidemic, the message has repeatedly been that it's especially the elderly who need to be cared for because they are at risk of dying from coronavirus infection. That's still the case, but as the months have passed, as more people have become infected, it turns out that even the 20 to 40-year-olds, i.e. the younger part of the population, can become seriously and long-term ill. Coronavirus can be accompanied by long-lasting symptoms, late effects such as fatigue, difficulty breathing, difficulty concentrating, headaches, despite the fact that the virus infection itself is over. This is also despite the fact that in the vast majority of cases, the younger ones have not been hospitalized with a serious illness or have had severe symptoms. There is a very wide range of symptoms that one can get in the aftermath of COVID-19, even if you're younger, where a large percentage, get this, between 20 to 30%, and in some inventories up to 40%, have sequelae for several weeks and months, says Jens Lundgren, professor of infectious disease medicine at Rigshospitalet. All right, up to 40%. Hey, word of the day, sequelae. I like this word. Sequela here is a condition which is the consequence of a previous disease or injury. That's a sequela. Sequelae, plural, here with the E on the end. Sequelae meaning many different things. Of course, they just mentioned them all, right? You could have difficulty breathing, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, headaches, and other things like that, maybe even kidney issues. So this is something still to be taken very seriously. And by the way, the tricky part about this is that even for people who had a less serious illness or they had very mild cases about this, and still they have these long-term sequelae that are impacting them for weeks, months, and hopefully not for a lifetime afterwards. So let's continue to take it seriously, of course. And we hear more and more about kids. This is a big thing that came out today and it was all over the place. Kids, more infectious. I had to put kids in quote marks up there. Why did I have to do that? Because I don't like their definition of kids here. The headline read, silent spreaders of COVID-19. Kids who seem healthy may be more contagious than sick adults. Study says, by the way, neither of those two things are actually indicated by the study directly. So let's look at this right now. Researchers at Mass Gen found that among 192 children, 49 tested positive for the coronavirus and had significantly higher levels of virus in their airways than hospitalized adults in intensive care units, according to the study published 30 in the Journal of Pediatrics. All right, first, by the time you're in the intensive care unit, a lot of people's viral loads have already declined because the viral load looks like this, and this might be a peak at about, 5 days or so, maybe 7. We'll call that a peak at 5 to 7 days of viral load. Where do people start to get ill with the cytokine storm that really takes them down, puts them in the hospital? It's usually typically out here somewhere around day 8, and by the time they're in the intensive care units, they might be out here at day 10 or 12 or something like that. So they're all the way out here on this part of the curve. So I would not be surprised to find that they have relatively lower viral loads compared to other folks who are earlier in the disease cycle. And the second reason I'm going to take exception with this was they said the study was composed of children from ages 0 to 22. 0 to 22. I get the 0 part. I get the 5. I get the 10. But by the time you're 22, that's too big of a lump. You can't do that. No, that doesn't count as kids right there. Kids, children. I think really, what we've seen in the data so far says that prepubescent and postpubescent, that would be a decent dividing line. So just pick a number, right? Call it 12, call it 13, call it 14, whatever number you want to put on that. I think you could say under that number, you could call that kids or children, and over that number, you'd have to call them teens and young adults and things like that. But certainly by the time you're 22, you can't be called a kid. It doesn't work out. So I don't really know what to make of this study yet. And the second thing that we don't know is that even though we know that children aren't really all that impacted by this disease that much, they did show up at the clinic or hospital. They showed up in an urgent care clinic or hospital. Doesn't necessarily mean they were admitted to the hospital. They arrived there. Okay, so that's part one. Part two is we don't know how transmissive they would be. So it's a supposition to say because they have a lot of virus in their airways that they would then be very much more contagious, but we don't know that. All right, so hey, some more good news though. We're going to look here now. We're going to turn to Ivermectin triple therapy as it's being called here. This came out in Newsmaker. I don't know if that's good, bad, or ugly. I'm unfamiliar with this news source right here. And the headline reads, Ivermectin triple therapy protocol for COVID-19 released to Australian GPs for infected elderly and frontline workers. Came out August 19th. That's yesterday. Triple therapy specialist Professor Thomas Borody, famous for curing peptic ulcers using a triple antibiotic therapy, saving millions of lives, has released the COVID-19 treatment protocol to Australian GPs who can legally prescribe it to their COVID-19 positive patients. They can also prescribe it as a preventative medication. Borody says this could be the fastest and safest and cheapest, he didn't mention that, cheapest way to end the pandemic in Australia within 6 to 8 weeks and probably elsewhere in the world. Good doctor. I wanted to put his picture because looks like a nice guy, but check this out. Thomas Borody, MB, BS, BSc in med, an MD, a PhD, a DSc, a FRACP, FACP, FACG, AGAF, FRSN. That's a lot of letters. So yeah, let's listen to what he had to say here. Not because of the letters necessarily, although obviously a very accomplished individual, but I do agree with a lot of what he said here. And by the way, he's had a great track record so far in his career. So listen up. He said here, no trial has shown ivermectin-based therapy to be ineffective. Get that. No trial yet has shown it to be ineffective. In fact, the international data reports an almost 100% cure rate and a symptom improvement within 4 to 6 days. We should share Australian findings from this triple therapy with the world, he said. An ivermectin tablet can cost as little as $2, which could make it by far the cheapest. Hey, he got the cheapest in there. Safest and fastest cure for Australians and the Australian economy. This needs to be available for aged care facilities and frontline health workers today. We have written the Federal Health Minister, Greg Hunt, and Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews for an urgent medical briefing to bypass the raft of advisors who need to know TGA-approved medicines do not require animal studies and prolonged clinical trials already done to approve them in the first place. So already approved stuff. The government could end the pandemic by openly encouraging GPs to prescribe these already TGA-approved medications. Those who test positive are identified in contact tracing, as well as those in high-risk groups like the elderly and healthcare workers can then access the therapy quickly. There is mounting worldwide clinical literature pointing to a 100% cure rate using ivermectin triple therapy. So what is that triple therapy? It's quite simply this. It's a triple therapy of ivermectin, zinc, and an antibiotic. Okay, they are ivermectin, that's known as the wonder drug from Japan. Awesome stuff. We've covered it before. Zinc, yes, of course, include the zinc. And doxycycline. This is FDA-approved tetracycline, a very common antibiotic that fights bacterial infections, so e.g. acne, urinary tract infections, viral, and malarial infections. Okay? Professor Borody is involved in a phase 2 study in the U.S. to potentially develop the triple therapy as a single blister pack compliance product. He says our study in the U.S. is looking at developing the triple therapy as a single product, which requires FDA approval, unfortunately, even though all 3 medications separately are already approved. By the way, you wouldn't have to wait for that if you wanted to take that. You could have your doctor prescribe zinc, doxycycline, and ivermectin. All right? And so how can this be? You know, when I was first reporting on the azithromycin angle, I was a little confused at first, too, because I'm like, well, that's the antibiotic. I've learned a lot since then. And, of course, the good doctors out there who have been prescribing azithromycin have known about this stuff for a while. And when I started to look into it, I realized, how has this not been a part of everything? Because it's pretty obvious once you start looking into it. So first, let's look at tetracycline. So far, tetracycles, four cyclical things. That's there's 1, and there's 2, and 3, and 4 right in the middle. So 4 circles, tetracycline. And the mechanism of action, tetracyclines are specific inhibitors of bacterial protein synthesis. They bind to the 30S. There's 2 ribosomal subunits, a 50S and a 30S. They bind to the 30S ribosomal subunit and prevent the binding of this amino acyl tRNA, that's transfer RNA, to the mRNA, the messenger ribosome complex. Okay, so that prevents the bacteria from making protein. So here's the 30S subunit right here. Here's the big old 50S one up here, and tetracycline binds right down here and prevents this thing from coming in and bringing its amino acid load there, and so it can't do that, so the polypeptide chain doesn't grow. Hey, no protein, no bacteria. So, hey, that's pretty cool. Then let's check out Zithromax. It's a macrolide. It has this very complicated shape here that looks like all those things. Guess what it does? It binds up here to the different site in the 50S subunit, also blocking the protein chains from growing. So fairly similar mechanisms of action, just targeting a slightly different spot on the on the ribosomes that are used to make the bacterial proteins. But it's more complex than that. So I want to get into it because I think this is important. So here we are in August 2014 article titled Azithromycin, Mechanisms of Action and Their Relevance for Clinical Applications. Pulled some text out of this. Check this out. Azithromycin, a macrolide antibiotic which inhibits bacterial protein synthesis, quorum sensing, and reduces the formation of biofilm. Okay, so it hits the bacteria. That's awesome. Accumulating effectively in cells, particularly phagocytes, it is delivered in high concentrations to sites of infection, as reflected in rapid plasma clearance and extensive tissue distribution. Great, so it gets all through the body nice and easy. Azithromycin is indicated for respiratory, urogenital, dermal, and other bacterial infections and exerts, get this, immunomodulatory effects in chronic inflammatory disorders, including diffuse panbronchiolitis, post-transplant bronchiolitis, and rosacea. So it has immune modulating effects. I did not know this before I started looking into this. Initial stimulatory effects of azithromycin on immune and epithelial cells involving interactions with phospholipids and ERK1 and 2 are followed by later modulation of transcription factors, AP-1, NF, kappa B, inflammatory cytokine, and mucin release. So cytokines, inflammatories, it's also modulating big parts of the cascade, which are also a bad part of what happens with SARS-CoV-2. But it's even beyond that at this point. Check this out. Delayed inhibitory effects on cell function and high lysosomal accumulation accompany disruption of protein and intracellular lipid transport, regulation of surface receptor expression of macrophage phenotype and autophagy. Okay. So, and right here, check this out. Contributing to the immunomodulatory effects of azithromycin contributing to resolution of acute infections and reduction of exacerbations in chronic airway diseases. So this is arguing for and also a very direct effect of azithromycin on the disease process of COVID-19, possibly by getting in there and interacting with the immune modulatory effects. In fact, how complex is it? Well, here's your azithromycin right here, and here are all the different things it's sort of mucking around with beyond just killing bad old bacteria by disrupting their protein synthesis. In fact, when we compare tetracycline and zithromax, we see looks pretty much the same. Tetracycline whacks this little spot down here. The macrolides inhibit this part up here, but either way, same thing happens. The bacteria can't grow their piece, but this raises the question for me, is there any way that these antibiotics are actually interfering with the ribosomal and or mRNA transcription and translation, which is necessary for the RNA virus, which is what a coronavirus is, which is what SARS-CoV-2 is. I'm wondering if it's also maybe somehow directly interfering with that part of it. Just conjecture, pure conjecture. But at the very least, we know that these antibiotics have a fairly complicated, serious mechanism of action. That's what MOA stands for up here, mechanism of action. But it gets even more direct than that. So we know here, look at this, azithromycin for COVID-19, more than just an antimicrobial. This came out in June. And check this out. It's been shown that AZM, azithromycin, has significant antiviral properties. In contrast with chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine, its antiviral activity has been shown in vitro and or in vivo on a large panel of viruses: Ebola, Zika, respiratory syncytial virus, influenza H1N1 virus, enterovirus, rhinovirus. Its activity against respiratory syncytial virus has been demonstrated in a randomized study in infants. Azithromycin exhibited synergistic antiviral effect against SARS-CoV-2 when combined with hydroxychloroquine both in vitro and in a clinical setting. All right, of note, these authors also reported a significant antiviral effect of azithromycin alone on SARS-CoV-2. The mechanisms of the antiviral effect of azithromycin support a large spectrum antiviral activity. Azithromycin appears to decrease virus entry into cells And in addition, it can enhance the immune response against viruses by several actions. Azithromycin upregulates the production of type 1 and type 3 interferons, especially interferon beta and interferon gamma, and genes involved in virus recognition, such as MDA5 and RIG1. These mechanisms are universally involved in the innate response against infectious agents, potentially against SARS-CoV-2. Innate response, that's the T cell response. That's the innate response compared to the humoral response. All right, that's pretty strong. So the next question is, well, if we've known about this stuff for a long time, and remember I said of all the things that the CDC ought to be doing is collecting all this research data and getting it out to the doctors. It shouldn't be up to doctors like Dr. Zelenko or Didier Raoult or any of the other people out there to sort of unearth this and figure it out on their own. I mean, they can. I guess that's part of their job. But when you have multi-billion-dollar agencies whose job it is to collect and assess and distribute this kind of information, the question becomes, why did we see hydroxychloroquine studies run without zinc and without azithromycin when we know that there's a combined synergistic effect in these things? Who would design a study that way? Remember, it was all the way back in April, I was saying that we needed the randomized double-blind controlled trials with azithromycin in there, with zinc, with hydroxychloroquine. But I'm also going to say now ivermectin, because ivermectin seems to have a pretty strong effect in there. And that triple therapy that the Australian doctor was talking about is ivermectin plus tetracycline plus zinc. So let's look a little deeper at tetracycline. It has known antiviral properties. So let's check this out. Therapeutic potential for tetracyclines in the treatment of COVID-19. From the abstract in this article here in the journal Pharmacotherapy, reads, quote, for example, one study deduced a mechanism discerning how doxycycline could potentially treat the dengue virus. They also showed that at normal human body temperature and fever conditions, doxycycline significantly inhibited the virus's own serine protease, as well as noting a concentration-dependent decrease in viral replication. Really important, because we know that these proteases here, so this was on the dengue virus, but we know that those proteases are necessary for that polybasic furin cleavage site to get activated so that the virus can be much more effective at entering cells and therefore replicating inside the cells. So we already know that it was found that doxycycline somehow inhibited the dengue virus from doing that kind of stuff. That's awesome. They also found that doxycycline inhibited the post-infection replication in addition to reducing the virus's ability to enter cultured cells. Another study showed that retroviral load was decreased by 70% when cells were treated with doxycycline at human body temperature. So tons of information here. We already knew this stuff long time ago. Second, tetracyclines may be able to treat COVID-19 infection through their well-known anti-inflammatory capabilities, including downregulation of the nuclear factor kappa B pathway, as well as a decrease in levels of inflammatory cytokines such as tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin 1 beta, and interleukin 6. Both interleukin 1 and interleukin 6 are being targeted by monoclonal antibodies, very fancy names, super expensive treatments that are given to desperate late-stage patients with massively really good effect. But here we have a cheap antibiotic, so-called, called tetracycline, that can down-regulate, that can modulate, but down-regulate both IL-1 and IL-6, independent of its antibiotic mechanism. Okay, that's awesome. So it was also shown that these particular cytokines are significantly elevated when severe acute respiratory syndrome associated coronavirus is exposed to lung tissue, in addition to exacerbating the pathogenesis of the infection itself. So, wow. Guess what? Tetracycline has a known impact on viral replication and has a known impact on modulating the immune response so that it in favorable ways. So, hey, first question is, which is better, hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin? Hey, here's a head-to-head trial, which is a randomized trial of ivermectin and doxycycline and hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin therapy on COVID-19 patients, came out in July. Methods. Patients with mild to moderate COVID-19 disease tested positive by RT-PCR for SARS-CoV-2 infection here in Bangladesh were included in the study. Patients were divided randomly into two groups. Ivermectin at 200 micrograms per kilogram, a single dose, plus doxycycline, 100 milligrams twice a day for 10 days. That's Group A. And hydroxychloroquine, 400 mg for the first day, then 200 mg twice a day for 9 days, plus azithromycin, 500 mg daily for 5 days. That's Group B. Okay. PCR was repeated in all symptomatic patients on the second day onward without symptoms, or for those who were asymptomatic throughout the process on the 5th day after taking the medication, and repeated every 2 days onward if the result was positive. So the time to negative PCR and time to full symptomatic recovery was measured for each group. What were the results? Glad you asked. The results of this were all subjects in the ivermectin doxycycline group, that's Group A, reached a negative PCR for SARS-CoV-2 at a mean of 8.93 days. So that's 100%. All of them achieved that negative PCR test. And all reached symptomatic recovery at a mean of 5.93 days. So all 100% reached symptomatic recovery. In the hydroxychloroquine azithromycin group, which was Group B, 96.36% reached a negative PCR at 6.99 days and were symptom-free at 9.33 days. So check this out. Ivermectin symptom-free at about 6 days and hydroxychloroquine at about 9.3 days. That's a full 3 days difference there. Actually 3.36 days. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Group A patients had symptoms that could have been caused by the medication in 31.67% of patients, including lethargy, nausea, and occasional vertigo. Group B, 46.3% had symptoms that could have been caused by the medication, including mild blurred vision, headache, increased lethargy and dizziness, and occasional palpitation, nausea, and vomiting. Conclusion here is the ivermectin doxycycline combination showed a trend towards superiority towards the hydroxychloroquine azithromycin combination in therapy in the case of patients with mild to moderate COVID. And of course, they say you need more testing. I didn't include that part, but that's what they were saying there. More testing, of course. Those are pretty positive results, though. And so, how about what if you gave both? So somebody else did that study saying effectiveness of ivermectin as an add-on therapy in COVID-19. And so what they did here is 16 patients, very small study, received a single dose of ivermectin on admission day as well as therapy to hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. So they were compared with 71 controls that just received HCQ and AZT, matched in age, gender, clinical features, comorbidities. The primary outcome was percentage of cured patients, defined as symptom-free to be discharged from the hospital, and 2 consecutive negative PCR tests. So of 87 patients in the study, mean age of the IVM group was similar to controls. So the p-value says that they were not significantly different, so they were the same. Majority of patients in both groups were male, but statistically not significant with male-female ratio here. Again, p.72 is not statistically significant. It would need to be p of 0.05 or lower to be significant. All the patients of the IVM group were cured compared with the controls, so that was 16 out of 16 versus 69. 2 patients died in the controls, and again, the controls here were hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. The mean time to stay in the hospital, however, was significantly lower in the IVM group compared with the controls. It was 7.62 versus 13.22 days. Now, again, just to be clear, this is IVM, ivermectin, and hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin being compared against just hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. So the control group here, air quotes, control was actually on azithromycin and hydroxychloroquine. But again, what we see here was a very, very significant time to resolution. Very powerfully statistically significant, p of 0.00005. So that was a very, very much a significant finding. No adverse events were observed. Conclusions, and again, no adverse events. Safe drugs here. Add-on use of IVM to HCQ plus AZT had better effectiveness, shorter hospital stay, and relatively safe compared with controls. However, a larger prospective study with longer follow-up may be needed to validate these results. Totally agree. Couldn't agree more. So very interesting findings there. So let me raise again here the common sense approach to dealing with SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19, whatever you want to call it. First, everybody prepares their terrain. You take vitamin D, you eat well, you reduce your stress, you sleep enough, all that stuff, right? Everybody wears a mask. Why? Because you want a lower viral load. If you're going to get this thing, start with the lowest load possible. That's called the inoculum. Everybody practices social distancing for the same reasons, and you get tested if or when suspicious of exposure or illness. At-risk people are always taking extra precautions. All right, 3, if exposure or illness is suspected and you want to catch that early, hydroxychloroquine plus and ivermectin are administered within 2 days of symptoms whenever possible, okay, as soon as possible. So that would be the common sense approach. Just look, everybody's as healthy as they can be. Duh, right? Everybody wears a mask, obvious reasons. 3, if anything happens, hydroxychloroquine plus ivermectin administered right away. You know, if for whatever reason symptoms progress beyond that anyway, then the Math Plus protocol is implemented. And if symptoms get worse beyond that, then you go to advanced therapeutic support. And that would be the common sense approach to all this. And step 5, maybe later a vaccine comes along. A lot of development, I assume one's coming along at some point. But you know what? We don't have to wait and hope. We don't have to just sit around killing our economy, watching businesses, small and medium-sized businesses die, watching the Federal Reserve pump money to the rich people so that they can end up buying everything up and doing all of that. We don't have to wait for that. We can just take this common sense approach. So the conclusions here for today are these. The XYZ plus hypothesis, it still holds so far. The first wave is the worst, and supported the idea that immunity to coronaviruses generally, but SARS-2 specifically, is mediated heavily by T cells. Lots of data coming out about this. I don't think there's a lot of question about this. This is really moving out of hypothesis into theory time. The rapid saliva tests are going to be super helpful. Rapid, cheap, plentiful. If you can do that, you can... If I thought I was exposed, I could do a rapid test. If it turns out I have SARS-CoV-2 virus, I can then isolate myself early and often from my family and loved ones and all of that. No, you don't want to get this disease. No, you don't. I think it's awful. I think it's unnatural. Hey, there's more data coming out all the time saying, kind of weird that how this thing is constructed and how it's not likely to have come from a natural place. And because of that unnaturality, you really don't want to get this because it's too well designed for human cells at this point. Now, in that basis, on that front, it is kind of novel. I know I said it wasn't novel, and it isn't because our bodies can already recognize components of it from other coronaviruses. With all of that said, it is kind of a novel thing in the sense that I think this is the first time humans have engineered a virus to have huge high affinity for human cells and then accidentally released it. So that's novel. Ivermectin plus tetracycline and hydroxychloroquine plus azithromycin provide excellent benefits when given early. Ivermectin maybe even has benefits later than hydroxychloroquine. Some of the studies I've read show that you can give it to people who are a little further down the line and it still has benefits on their overall outcome and all of that. But we have to ask, why aren't these treatments being given at every possible chance to help? Why aren't they being given early? Look, what's the harm? That's the first thing you have to ask. What is the harm? If hydroxychloroquine is a very safe compound, and it is, if ivermectin is a very safe compound, and it is, and the alternative is we don't have anything else to give for early outpatient, mild cases, things like that, then why wouldn't you give these things? The downside is what? The upside, I can articulate to you, it's avoiding long-term sequelae, meaning long-term downstream impacts of this thing, shortness of breath, confusion, possible damage to major organs. If you could avoid that, if that's the downside of COVID-19, and you could avoid that, then why wouldn't you do that? That's the question. And I don't understand why not. And now we've got people like this super deluxe. Look at the Professor Thomas Barodi. Look, if you're not going to listen to this guy, I don't know who you're going to listen to. But at any rate, I totally agree with his triple therapy here. Ivermectin, zinc, doxycycline looks like a winning combination. But again, why wouldn't you? Why not? What's What rational reason could you say you wouldn't try something like this, given the fact that we have all of this data that says it actually works and there's no other early outpatient treatment that we know about yet? Maybe a better one will come along, but why aren't we doing this? Possibly because it's $2 a pill and wicked cheap. All right. There is no reason to continue with the extreme lockdowns at this point, not if we follow this common sense approach up here. If we could do that, I think we can just end the lockdowns at this point in time and get back on with opening up the economies and doing all of that, if that's something we want to do. By the way, common sense, here's the thing about common sense. It's not a gift. It's a punishment. Yeah, because you have to deal with everyone who doesn't have it. I live in a country that's wicked short on common sense right now, and I think it's only going to get worse as the election approaches and people lose their collective minds, but another story for another day. Remember, it didn't have to be this way. It really didn't. We've had this data. I just presented to you data that shows that we, scientists, have known about, the medical community has known about the antiviral properties of azithromycin and tetracycline for a long time. We've known about ivermectin and its potential impacts for a long time. We've known about hydroxychloroquine and its impacts for a long time. By the way, 2005 paper with Fauci's own name on it talks about how chloroquine could be a very effective thing against classic SARS. So that's a proven thing. And here we are all mystified by this drug, which has been heavily politicized, and also AstroTurf by the pharma companies, who are very, very interested in making sure that cheap, effective off-patent medications don't really get a fair shake in the system. That's the world we live in. Hey, what are you going to do about it? Well, you're going to research for yourself, learn for yourself, and you're going to ask your own questions and make up your own mind about how you would want to be treated. But I will tell you that for myself, if I think I've been exposed or I'm coming down with SARS-CoV-2 infection, I'm definitely going on my personal choice. I'm definitely going going to follow the good doctor in Australia's advice on all of that. In fact, yeah, I'm just going to follow the common sense approach here. This right here, step 3. That's what I would take personally, not medical advice. Neither is this. Step 1 of the common sense approach is make sure that your personal immune system has what it needs to fight things off. D3, super important. Making sure you have quercetin and zinc, super important. Quercetin it's an ionophore, allows the zinc to get into your cells, and that's where the zinc does its most good. And of course, if you do feel that tickle in the throat, something's coming down, you've got, any sort of a flu, a cold, anything coming along, Gobble Mountain Elderberry Company makes this great organic elderberry syrup right here. It's something I use routinely throughout every year when I feel some sort of a tickle in the throat. I have that early premonition that maybe I'm coming down with something. Boom, I start hitting the elderberry syrup 3 times a day, doing a shot of it in essence, and it's worked for me. Anecdotal, N of 1, it's worked for me. It's really kept me from having a full-blown disease in a very long time. If you do find yourself sick, make sure you got lots of vitamin C and acetylcysteine going on. All right, who are we at Peak Prosperity? We're the common sense party, I guess. I don't know. It's just like we can add 1 + 1, come up with 2 all the time and reliably, and we can read papers for ourselves, and we can ask important questions. And a lot of people in this community now, and it's just really heartening to see people who've gotten our T-shirt and they sent a pic to us, and therefore we were able to post their pic here on our Instagram page. So page after page now of fine, wonderful people looking happy, smiling, lots of greenery, lots of garden space, lots of folks here with making real changes in their lives to be resilient and improve the resilience of themselves and those around them. So if you did plant a garden, congratulations. It's time now to harvest that garden. Be sure to do that. And as well, remember to resubscribe to this channel. If you've been unsubscribed as well, I'm going to ask you now for one thing, very simple thing, is to hit the like button if you happen to have liked this, if you think we deserved it, if you think the amount of effort we put into bringing you this information was important to you, then hit the like button. Very simple, doesn't cost you nothing. But what it does do is it allows the YouTube algorithms to say, hey, people like this, and they're going to show it to other people who possibly really need to hear this information. All right, that's all I've got for today. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back next week. See you then.
Hi, folks. This is Adam Taggart, Chris's co-founder at Peak Prosperity. To get your own resilient shirt, simply go to peakprosperity.com/shirts. Each shirt is made of 100% organic cotton and produced in the USA. And when your shirt arrives, please send us a photo of you wearing it if you feel comfortable doing so. We'll add you to our wall of proud Peak Prosperity members who are showing the world that resilience is the way to a better future. Thanks for watching.